March 14th, 1879, Ulm, Germany. A child was born who would not speak until he was 2 years old, who would not read fluently until he was 7, whom one teacher reportedly dismissed as mentally slow, unsociable, and adrift forever in his foolish dreams. His father was told the boy would never amount to anything. The boy's name was Albert Einstein. By the time he died in 1955, he had fundamentally changed the human understanding of space, time, energy, gravity, and the nature of light itself. He had rewritten the laws of physics that Isaac Newton had laid down 200 years earlier, and that everyone assumed were the permanent bedrock of science. He had done most of this in a single year, 1905, while working as a patent clerk in Bern, Switzerland, with no laboratory, no university position, and no colleagues to discuss his ideas with. Historians of science call it his miracle year. In that 12-month period, the 26-year-old patent clerk published 4 papers, each of which would have been enough to make any scientist's career. Together they changed everything. But what if he had never been born? What if that child in Ulm in 1879 had never drawn breath, or had grown up to be an accountant, a shopkeeper, anything other than the most transformative scientific mind of the 20th century? The answer is genuinely complicated, and the most honest version of it is more unsettling than the simple story of loss most people would expect. Here is what the scientific establishment actually says about this question. Big Think, drawing on the work of astrophysicist Ethan Siegel, published a careful analysis concluding that even without Einstein, every one of his great scientific advances would still have occurred. Eventually. The science was in the air. The problems Einstein solved were problems the entire physics community knew existed and was working on. Special relativity was so close to being discovered that the French mathematician Henri Poincaré had already formulated most of the mathematics, and the Dutch physicist Hendrik Lorentz had published the transformation equations that Einstein independently derived. Had Einstein never existed, special relativity likely arrives within a decade, perhaps less. General relativity, Einstein's theory of gravity, his true masterpiece, the idea that mass curves space-time itself, is more complicated. The German mathematician David Hilbert was working on the same problem simultaneously and submitted his own version within days of Einstein's final paper. Without Einstein, Hilbert likely gets there, but the path may have been longer, stranger, and the final theory might have looked subtly different. John Carroll, a theoretical physicist at Johns Hopkins University, put it bluntly. He is pretty sure that if Albert Einstein had never existed, general relativity would still have been invented. Eventually. The key word is eventually. And in history, eventually is everything. Because the technologies that depend on Einstein's theories do not wait politely for the science to catch up. They arrive when the science arrives, and not a moment before. Your GPS does not work without Einstein. This is not a metaphor. The satellites in the GPS constellation are moving fast and are far from Earth's gravitational field, which means that according to Einstein's theories of special and general relativity, their onboard clocks run at a slightly different rate than clocks on the ground. The difference is tiny, about 38 microseconds per day. But GPS works by measuring the travel time of signals between satellites and receivers to calculate position with extreme precision. A 38 microsecond timing error accumulates into a positional error of roughly 11 kilometers per day. Without relativistic corrections built into the system, your GPS would drift so far from reality within hours that it would be useless. Every navigation system on Earth, commercial aviation, shipping, military guidance, Your phone telling you where the nearest coffee shop is requires Einstein's equations to function. In a world where those equations arrive 10 or 20 years later, those systems arrive 10 or 20 years later. But the most explosive consequence of Einstein never existing has nothing to do with GPS, it has to do with a letter. In August of 1939, Albert Einstein signed a letter addressed to President Franklin Roosevelt. The letter warned that German scientists had recently discovered nuclear fission, and that this discovery could potentially be used to create a bomb of previously unimaginable destructive power. It urged the president to begin American research into nuclear weapons immediately, before Nazi Germany could build one first. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists has called this letter one of the most consequential documents in the history of science. It directly prompted Roosevelt to organize the research program that became the Manhattan Project. Einstein later considered signing the letter his one great mistake. When he learned that Germany had never come close to building a bomb, he said that had he known this, he would have never lifted a finger. Without Einstein, that letter is never written. Not because the physics was unique to him. Other scientists understood fission. But because the letter worked precisely because of who signed it. Einstein's worldwide fame, his moral authority, his personal relationship with the Roosevelt social circle, these were what got the letter past Roosevelt's gatekeepers and onto the president's desk. Leo Szilard, the Hungarian physicist who actually wrote most of the letter and conceived the idea of sending it, had already tried to get an audience with the Roosevelt administration through other channels and been turned away. It was Einstein's name alone that opened the door. A Roosevelt who never receives that letter in 1939 does not create the Advisory Uranium Committee. He does not commit the resources that eventually became the $2 billion Manhattan Project. He does not build the bomb. Germany, meanwhile, has its own nuclear program. It is poorly organized and underfunded. Hitler's ideological hostility to what he dismissively called Jewish physics, meaning Einstein's relativity and the quantum mechanics that grew from it, had driven many of the best physicists out of Germany. The German bomb program in our timeline was nowhere close to success. But without the American program running at full speed, and without the pressure of knowing the Americans were racing toward the bomb, the timeline shifts. The urgency that put the bomb in American hands by the summer of 1945 does not exist. Does the war end differently? Does it last longer? Does Germany, under different circumstances, manage to develop a working reactor before the Allies? These questions have no clean answers. But the Manhattan Project, one of the most consequential technological programs in human history, whose success ended one war and defined the entire strategic architecture of everything that followed, rests on a letter that Einstein almost did not sign. Written in a summer when he was on sailing vacation and nearly unreachable, delivered to Roosevelt's desk by a man who read it aloud because he was afraid the president would not read it himself. That is the thread that runs from a patent clerk in Bern to Hiroshima, and without Einstein, it is a thread that may never have been pulled. Then there is the deeper, stranger consequence. Einstein did not just change physics. He changed what humans believe is possible to know. Before Einstein, the universe was a machine, Newtonian, deterministic, comprehensible in principle to any sufficiently clever mind. After Einstein, the universe is something far more disorienting. Curved space, dilated time, energy and mass interchangeable. The speed of light has an absolute limit that nothing in the universe can cross. These ideas did not just change textbooks. They changed philosophy, literature, art, and the way educated people in the 20th century understood their place in the cosmos. The generation that grew up after Einstein thought differently about reality than the generation before him. Whether that is better or worse is a question philosophy cannot fully answer. But it is different. And a world without Einstein is a world where that particular transformation of human consciousness, the one that made the 20th century feel simultaneously more frightening and more wondrous than any that came before, takes a different shape, arrives on a different schedule, or perhaps never fully arrives at all. Einstein himself, near the end of his life, was asked what weapon he thought World War III would be fought with. He said he did not know what weapons World War III would be fought with, but he was certain that World War IV would be fought with sticks and stones. He had done the math. He understood, better than anyone, exactly what his own work had made possible. If Einstein had never existed, do you think the world would be more or less dangerous today? Drop your answer below